Hello and welcome to The Current Thing with me, Nick Dixon, where we talk about the culture war, politics, and anything else that comes up. And we have another great episode because we had Reform UK, and now we have someone from the Reclaim Party, filmmaker, former TV director, podcaster, and all-around legend, my friend Mr. Alex McCarron. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Cool. So you're like the filmmaker and secret kind of genius behind everything at the Reclaim Party. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't say there's anything particularly secret about it. But, we're churning out the content as is. And then we've got some really good stuff in the pipeline. Because we want to move towards more of the kind of documentary style side of things, which is great because it's what I like to do.
Yeah. How did you get involved in Reclaim?
I'd worked a little bit with Martin Daubney, and then he asked me to come along to help out Laurence a little bit when Laurence was standing for mayor, and just I kept on doing more and more little jobs for him, and then he said, do you want to come work for me all the time, or most of the time? And I was like, yeah.
And that's Laurence Fox. For the listener living in a cave, what are the goals of the Reclaim Party? And is it like a real party, or is it just like Laurence Fox's kind of project? It could just be called the Laurence Fox Party.
I think that the goals are in general to change politics, and I think it's one of many aspects of a kind of generalized fight back from. I wouldn't even say from the right exactly. I'd more probably say from the anti-woke libertarian liberty side of things. And in terms of what we're doing, I think it's fair to say, I don't think I'll get in trouble for saying we've been very open. We're not going to stand 600 people in 600 seats. But what we are interested in doing is making a noise, making a fuss, and putting people in interesting places, interesting people in interesting places, basically.
All right. And so you had Reform. People had Belinda on from Reform, and she was saying, I think they are going to stand seats with Reform pretty much everywhere, stand people around the country. But you're being a bit more...
big fan of Belinda. I work with her a little bit. She's great.
Oh, cool. Yeah, she's great. And we've got Richard Tice coming on. May have already been out by the time this comes out. We don't know. But we want to do Reclaim as well as Reform. And so, do you think personally then, or as a Reclaim person, that we need proportional representation in the UK?
I'm really torn on the matter, to be honest, because I think if you look at places that have proportional representation, their politics is just such a disaster. You have your Italys where, the coalitions upon coalitions that last, 8 months, and then there's another election, and no one can get overall control unless there's some kind of, monster like Berlusconi. But then often they end up being very technocratically led. But on the other hand, you could argue that, well, we've kind of got that anyway. Sunak was the technocrats option. But when you think about it, I think in 2015 UKIP got 5 million votes, something like that. And if you go through a lot of the seats on Wikipedia, which I have, you've got UKIP, in second place in a lot of them, and really pushing hard for second, if they're not even second. And to get 0 votes out of that
Seats.
Sorry, 0 seats. When I can't remember who made this point. I heard it recently, but the SNP got 1 million or 2 million votes, and they got 50 seats. It's absolutely.
Scotland's very small.
Yeah, and so I think it would be good if
5 million votes, 2 seats. This was just an article from The Guardian in 2015. So 5 million votes, 2 seats. A bit harsh, isn't it?
Yeah, and one of those seats was Douglas Carswell, who's like a really special politician. So we had him on the Laurence Fox show the other day, because I'm always interested to see what he's got to say. And in a way, it was quite he was sort of quite inspiring. He was saying, "Well, Laurence, you just have to keep going for it," because, and he sort of he says, yeah, it is an insurmountable obstacle, the kind of political system, but that's not a reason not to go after it.
Yeah, it's impossible, but let's do it anyway. Yeah. That kind of reminds me of the debate between Carl Benjamin and Peter Hitchens on Twitter, where the two stances were Peter Hitchens, the country's finished, full stop, and Carl, it's finished, but let's give it a crack anyway, because I'm an optimist. Like, it's like a kind of Samuel Beckett thing, like, you just can't go on and then you go on. It kind of reminds me of that.
Did you see the program they did after that, where I think it was Connor and Dan were talking about that incident, and they were saying how much they admire Peter Hitchens and how they got loads of his books in the office, how they really like him, and
oh yeah, I did see that.
But he hates us. And I think it's funny how, I mean, I think Peter Hitchens is quite special as well, but yeah, it's funny how I think he's almost more at home talking to Novara Media, Orange Jones, than people on his side, as it were. And
I know, but he didn't hate Carl. He had some frosty exchanges with some of the Lotus Eaters crew, but actually Carl towards the end it sort of thawed somewhat. But yeah, no, good point. He did an interview with Novara, with Aaron Bastani. He's done 2 with Owen Jones, and it's weird he gets on better with them.
Yeah, and he doesn't realise perhaps that he has this kind of young fan club, but after preaching to them that the best strategy is to leave the country, that actually, 20 of them set up a media company in Swindon.
Mm-hmm. He's like the misanthropic granddad that you like anyway. Like my granddad, who was never actually nice, but you just love him anyway because it's granddad. No, I like Hitchens. I've had some good exchanges with him, and I've read his books, and especially Rage Against God, Abolition of Britain, absolutely brilliant. One of our great writers and journalists.
What I like about him is I've had a couple of conversations with him, and they're initially about sort of practical matters, like media kind of work stuff. And then it just kind of turns into this conversation about history, and Stalin and Lysenko, and why was it that Stalin trusted Hitler when there's the one person? And I love those people where you can kind of drift into conversation like that, and to drift into interesting conversation, like we're doing now.
Yeah. We're gradually drifting into interesting conversation. We'll get there. I think the hilarious thing about Hitchens as well is, I've said this before, but like everything is a sign of cultural decay. So I might have said this before somewhere, but I was on the Carl podcast, but I was zoning out listening to the Abolition of Britain on Audible. It had been on for too long or something, and I thought, oh, he's talking about the internet. Like, and then once it was invented, everything collapsed, and I suddenly realised he's talking about television. It was like, with the advent of television, it was basically all over. And then Carl goes, no, I can up you one on that. Central heating. There's a bit in the book that I somehow missed where he's like, with the advent of central heating, the British family declined. There was no need to sit in the same room anymore, and the family became atomized. It's all like, and then I was trying to top that. I was like, the advent of the chair was really the end of Britain. People's spines ossified as quickly as their spirits. And that one's made up, but it's a fun game. Like, what can't Hitchens say is a harbinger of doom.
Crop rotation in the 14th century, that one.
Yeah. With the advent of agriculture, people no longer had to hunt, and they became weak, and their spirits were crushed. Yeah,
I know what it was like. People
I was
used
there.
to hunt.
Why are you telling me? Yeah. I don't recognise the country anymore. Yeah, I don't care what happens anymore. I'm nearly dead. Yeah, hopefully we'll get him on, but I'm actually too scared to get him on. I could probably get him. I see him at GB, but I'm just too scared that I'm not ready. And that if he tells me off, I'll just be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hitchens."
No, well, he does do that. But
yeah, he will. It's quite a high likelihood. It's not one of my made-up fears. Alex, I don't normally.
As opposed to all the other ones.
Yeah, well, I've got quite a lot of neurotic fears that I'm working on, but this is a very. It's like, imagine I go to the therapist. I've got a fear of Peter Hitchens chastising me. That's just a memory, Nick. That's just a very likely possibility. I normally wait, actually, to ask the question, is the country finished? But since we've drifted into that, I always ask this because we've had various replies, and Jeff Norcott was saying, no, I don't think it's finished. We're positive, optimistic country, and Belinda was optimistic at Reform UK. But Callum from Lotus Eaters, not so optimistic, partly because of the housing crisis. And I've realised it comes down to whether you own a house or not. But what's your view, Alex? Is the country, UK, England, Britain, whichever you prefer, finished, forever, doomed, like I claimed in a Substack article?
I think it is and it isn't. And that's such a crap answer, but I do get Callum's thing. So I do have a house, but it's a fucker to own. It costs a fortune. And our childcare is a fortune as well. And the sort of aspects of, if you take Liz Truss's premiership, she wanted to reform childcare and cut tax a little bit, and basically the government imploded. The blob was vexed and attacked, and I think that one of my worries is that when Starmer gets in, it's not exactly him, because he's a completely incapable man, but the machine that comes in with him. It's a little bit like the Biden administration. And the machine that comes in with him will entrench a lot of the problems when the rot set in the Blair years, that the Tories have been unable to fix, will just become totally entrenched, and there'll be nothing left. So, for instance, one of my big bugbears, and I don't think it's something that people really understand, is the extent to which we fund this giant third sector charity sector, which is effectively like a tumour on the country that's metastasizing all the time. And so I think it was Chris Snowden made the point about childcare reform, and the BBC went to some kind of national childcare union or something that was screaming blue murder at it. And this reform was simply to sort of change the number of kids that a childminder can look after in the nursery. And it's currently one carer to 3 kids. And Hunt wanted to change it to 4 or 5 or so, I'm not sure. And it was bringing it in line with Scotland. And people were going crazy about it, going, "Oh, this is impossible, all the children will die, it'll be awful." And when you dig into the funding of that group who was giving that comment, it's, once again, taxpayer funded. And you look into how childcare works in Europe. In Germany it's like 10 kids, or even there's no limit for every nursery person. I think Sweden it's 8 or 10. And so it's like everything seems to be sort of so regulated, and it's almost as if any kind of libertarianism is a dirty word, and the country survives economically on housing bubble, cheap labour, and the finance industry in London, and a bit of tech, but really, any kind of healthcare reform, just to bring this country in line with you. I mean, that's another irony. It's like, since 2016, all we can hear from the intelligentsia class is how this country could or should be like Europe. But the idea that we can make our health system like Europe is just impossible. It's fascism,
Yeah. There's always that irony with Germany. It was like, Germany is doing so much better with X and Y, usually COVID. Germany's so much better. Our NHS is amazing and perfect. I'm like, well, which is it? It's like, we love Europe and the EU, but our NHS is better than Europe. Is it? But it's obviously not.
Well, in a way, that kind of highlights what wokery is for me, because sometimes there's one of the little tricks that the woke will do is say, "Well, define woke," like a rhetorical trick, as we were talking about earlier. And I think for me, wokery is it's a mistake to think of it as a coherent ideological framework. It's actually a set of virtue positions, right? So, and they all kind of work. They're constantly shifting in priority, right? So, so we've recently had a shift back to Russia being the bad guy, Okay, and partly that was because there was a very coherent, concerted campaign to blame Russia for Brexit and Trump and stuff. It's a total conspiracy theory. At the same time, with things like healthcare, um, there's this subservient, the idea of actually having good healthcare and learning from our neighbours is subservient to the idea of the NHS being the most respectable thing we have. And I think part of that comes from it's the only way that the left can experience patriotism. And then, but then that kind of crashes in to the matter of Britain is inherently worse than Europe, right? But the problem is these two positions are so contradictory that they don't match. It's like magnets repel, and so I see wokery as this like a constant, it's almost like spinning plates or something like that, just to kind of move and warp together.
It's like a Mario platform game. There's different platforms moving around in the air.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what I think it is. And so I think, to answer the question, is the country fucked? I think it is to the extent of like these little wiggly worms, the platforms are kind of subsuming the whole thing. And I think demographic change is totally inevitable as well. I mean, but on the one hand, you could say, well, it's always been a kind of elemental force. But then on the other hand, I think, well, actually, if you look at what gets the views in your YouTube videos, your podcasts, your Substacks, if you put as your title for your video article, the country is social collapse, demographic bomb, something like this, you'll find your views are huge.
Yeah, I went with England is lost forever, and that was my biggest Substack.
Yeah, I mean, I just put a Substack saying kill Radio 4, bury
Nice.
Radio 4 and salt the earth. Because you can't go halves on these things. And I think there's some ways in which our side can end up being a kind of inverse Greta. I like to pronounce it Greta because it makes me seem more sophisticated.
Yeah, and you also, it shows the correct respect for Saint Greta.
Greta. As if she is a
So
saint.
I made it sound Italian. Greta.
Yeah. It's like, well, I like to call it IKEA because that's what they called it in Holland where I used to live.
I don't even know what the word is there. What word are you saying?
IKEA.
Oh, IKEA.
Yeah, they called it IKEA.
IKEA. Okay.
So Greta. So her spiel is basically, I had an argument with this with some friends over the weekend. She thinks human civilization will end within 30 to 50 years unless we return to a kind of pre-capitalist barter system and then all kind of technology, all kind of locomotion, internal combustion.
Yeah, there was that deleted tweet, wasn't there? Sorry to interrupt, but there was that deleted tweet. It's going to end. It was posted in 2018. We've got 5 years. If fossil fuels doesn't something or other, we've got till June basically for the world to end for her to be proved right. She deleted it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I think there's that side of us. That side is in our side, So, there's a lot of people who thought that the jabs would kill millions of people, but they didn't. Now, I'm not saying I didn't get the thing myself, and I don't think other people should.
You wouldn't be on this podcast if you did, Alex. It's pure bloods only. There's a test.
It's like the inverse vaccine mandate. Other places had to have the vaccine mandate to work, but here you need it the other way. But
I just realised if we stick this on YouTube, we have to bleep anything that says the word.
God,
I'm not going to say the word again.
Yeah.
The safe and
I
effective
know
treatment.
we have to do the same. Like it's such a pain in the arse. I'm not going to go there again. But the point I'm making is that actually let me make that point in another way. There is a kind of aspect on our side that the cabal or whatever it is will subsume everything that we have, everything that we hold dear, that we're basically going to be enslaved, that we're run by these kind of Lovecraftian beings of some form in a shadowy room. and that we're all going to be kind of digital currency slaves and all the rest of it. I kind of see that as implausible as the Greta stuff in a way. I mean, I think that it's healthy for us to move it. I think on balance, it's healthy for us to think about those things and think about, what would a digital currency look like? What like Dan Tubb makes a great point that a lot of digital ID, digital currency, they might be okay now, but they're only one software update away from being tyranny. And I think that's really important. But at the same time, I do kind of wonder about this tendency to catastrophism that we've had very, very strongly since 2020. And I can get it completely because I went through a whole pit of sadness during the whole lockdown thing. Not just for the lockdown itself, but I was genuinely terrified that we would never get out of it. And that was because a lot of prominent people were on the pro lockdown side were saying we'll have these restrictions forever. And I remember Susan Mickey saying it on an interview. So a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain and a member of the SBIB of SAGE, the Behavioural Sciences part, saying it and not being challenged, and when Desmond Swayne would get up in Parliament and say, government advisors saying that we'd have these measures in perpetuity, the minister didn't get up on the dispatch box and go, it's okay. I mean, the only person who fucking did it was the Queen when she said, we will meet again. None of the prime ministers. I mean, lockdown 3 was the worst because it was like, don't call us, we'll call you. Like, we're not telling you when we're getting out of this. And now I'm okay because we got out and we all did, and my son is living a nice childhood. But I think some people, that pit that was we got put into, people are struggling to get out of.
Yeah, and it did feel like that. And of course, you did a podcast called Escape from Lockdown, and it did feel like we would be trapped. And if we didn't want the safe and effective treatment, we were like, will I have to have a passport? Will I be allowed in society? Are my family going to speak to me? I didn't dare tell some members of my family about it. It's like, will they put me in a camp? I wouldn't put it past certain people. It did go very mad, and some people didn't recover, and they thought it was going to kill millions, as you say, and they went really down the conspiracy rabbit hole to where everything's fake. Like the Will Smith slap, I saw someone like sharing a close-up, and there's like a thing on Chris Rock's cheek, and it's all planned. I'm like, the slap was not planned, guy. You know what I mean? Like, some things aren't planned. I was very much like, I'm not taking this safe and effective thing. That's my own choice. But nor do I think it's necessarily to kill everyone. You know what I mean? So, which is what I said to you on your podcast, Escape from Lockdown. I'm a conspiracy moderate. That's where I coined that term. And I think we kind of exist in a similar place there because, so I do this other podcast, as you know, with Toby Young. He's obviously Team Toby because he's Toby. Then there's James, who's Team James on the London Calling podcast with Toby. But then there's Team Nick, which is somewhere in between the two. Which is, I'm not sure dinosaurs did exist, but I'm not making a big thing of it. I don't think Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by a ringer, but I do think the World Economic Forum is a bit dodgy. And is that roughly where you are? You might not be with me on the dinosaurs.
I for a while now I've been calling myself Team Joby, which I find one part Team James and 3 parts Team Toby.
Nice.
And I think that's a good place to be. Because I mean, I schooled James on this stuff. I mean, I was the first one to tell him about like things like 9/11 and stuff like that, and he had no idea.
He hadn't heard of it. James, there was a big event.
He'd heard of the main incident, but like he didn't. I was like, some people also think that this other thing happened, and he's like, no. And I felt when he goes on, I just feel like saying it's a little bit like a band that you're into when you were younger. Because when I was 16, I think I did a school assembly on the Bilderberg group.
I was going to ask you about that. You told me that. Because we were saying that we had been red pilled for ages. So you were the original red pillar. 16 school assembly.
Yeah,
Guys, it's all Bilderberg.
2002 in Surrey. Um, yeah, and it was, and the thing that you find, so John Ronson made a really good point about conspiracy theorists, which is that they don't do the legwork, they get everything from just what they see and they kind of just invent it. Whereas if you've been a kind of proper journalist, as I have, I've knocked on people's doors whose kids have gone off to fight with ISIS to try and get them to, come on television. I've, tracked down people and this sort of basic journalistic stuff that people do it in various different ways. They work their way up for the local papers and have to do this stuff, and all of that's kind of gone now. And to be fair, it's gone in the mainstream as well, where sort of standard journalism involves kind of aggregating sort of 5 tweets, and then like, yeah, that's my article, that's my story. And I just, but it is a good, interesting point. And so a good example of that is how last year I was filming when Laurence and Harry went down to see this guy in Hampshire, this former soldier who got arrested.
Yeah, just for the listener, obviously Laurence Fox and Harry, former policeman. What? Sorry?
Harry Miller.
Miller, that's it. Sorry, I forgot his name. Harry Miller. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so basically, for listeners who don't know the story, this guy, he was a former soldier, and he was part of a Facebook group, and he put on this series of 4 progress pride flags that have been inverted in a certain way to look like a swastika, and he put it on this chat, this Facebook debate club, I think. They said, what do you guys think of this? Because it's been shared a bit on Twitter. And they came after, the police came around his house. He was away. They came around again. And then after that time, he contacted us because he was aware of what we do. And so we went out. And then our plan was just to kind of burst out the kitchen, go, haha, you're on camera. Harry was going to go, look, you can't do this. And they were trying to threaten this guy with a £60 fine and some kind of conviction or something. I can't remember exactly what. You have to check the film because that's got all the legal details. So legal, fuck off. This is just my memory of it. It's not exactly it. And then, but it definitely was a £6 fine and all that. And so Harry was going to present him with, like, you guys don't know the law, so you've got to come on our course. You were going to make this guy go on your course. You can come on ours instead. And we thought they'd just be very silly and go home. And just the whole thing escalated, and I was like, "What the fuck?" And they're like, "Harry got arrested. This guy got arrested." And it was 7 cops came. And I just see it unfolding, and I remember asking them, like, are you not going to... the Daily Mail printed that picture. Are you not going to arrest the whole editorial staff? And the policeman goes, well, we don't have resources for that. And I thought, that's a really dumb thing to say. How are you ever going to get a conviction?
Yeah, the only reason they weren't going to arrest the entire Daily Mail editorial staff was a numbers problem.
Yeah, as if, like, Hampshire Constabulary would be on their ass, walking through Fleet Street. And I was just baffled by the whole... I was watching it and thinking, you guys are just so dumb. Like, can you not see this is an absolute PR disaster for you? Anyway, it happened. It was. Harry and the guy got completely released. No charges, no nothing. And it was, one of the very early great victories for the Bad Law Project. And beyond that, I think people within Hampshire got moved about. I'm not sure. But there was a big change and everyone got involved in it. And I found this YouTube video just deconstructing the video that I'd made and Laurence's live stream, completely explaining why it was controlled opposition, PSYOP, limited hangout, whatever the phrase. false flag. Just really going through it in quite detail. Just the most vivid imagination, if I can put it that way. But we sort of had its own kind of logical consistency, and you just when you're so intimately part of something, and you see people completely deconstructing it. And my favourite bit was one of the guys' sort of ironclad bits of evidence was that, like, in order to do this kind of thing, you need actors. Like, do you know what Laurence used to do?
Adds up.
Yeah, think about it.
Yeah, mate. He's an actor. This is what he does. Wake up.
Exactly.
Yeah, TikTok. Yeah, whatever it is. This that. Yeah. Big announcement coming
Have you ever
soon.
seen that?
That's another one.
That video someone's done of it's a Star Wars, the first Star Wars film, where they sort of build a conspiracy video out of, like, it was actually an inside job.
Right.
Because Luke was his father and stuff. And, like, how could you get a X-Wing fighter through that shallow trough without being shot down? It doesn't make any sense. And I thought it was so completely brilliant, that video, because it just kind of showed what you can do. And but having said that, I did say I'm one part Team James, three parts Team Toby, probably Team Nick. Things like they sort of call it the World Economic Forum conspiracy theory. I'm just like, show me the conspiracy. Like, what about this is hidden to you?
I'm on the website right now. Like, we will penetrate the cabinet. We will reset society. Like, it's all there.
I mean, I think the difference is that in terms of they probably exaggerate their effectiveness, but on the other hand, it's like I take the view that bureaucracies become kind of autonomous after a while, and they're like self-organizing systems that perpetuate themselves, and so maybe the sort of prime ministers and everything are not going around at WF taking notes on what they should be doing. But policy kind of evolves through the ministries and departments of governments in the world. It kind of travels up the chain. And a lot of policy advisors aren't much more than graduates. You know what I mean? And so they're probably kind of imbibing all of this stuff. It's like, I go to Germany a lot, and I was thinking, I was getting our bags to go to a supermarket automatically, and I didn't check to think, oh, do they just do bags there? And I realised, yeah, fucking everywhere you can't get plastic bags. It wasn't just here. I've been working on this project about tech censorship, and we call it the online safety bill, but there's one in Ireland, there's one in Australia, there's one in South Africa. They all call it safety or harms in some way. It's essentially the same kind of bill. And so it's funny how this stuff happens kind of everywhere all at once. I think
another quick example it springs to mind is the corporate equality index that James Lindsay just done a long thread about in relation to Dylan Mulvaney. Why is Dylan Mulvaney the new face of Nike? It's probably this corporate equality index where you get points, and it's just like the Stonewall equality index, workplace equality index in our country.
Yeah, exactly. Like this stuff just happens. The bans on plastic straws. All this stuff. And you kind
is that just because it's a coordinated globalist Western? It's the Western world versus like Russia and China. So the West just does everything at once. That's globalism, right?
I mean, I've not been to Russia, but it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of this stuff happens there too.
Well, Callum has. He was explaining on another podcast. It is actually a bit different over there. But anyway, go on. I interrupted your Germany-based plastic bag anecdote.
Well, that was the end of it. It's just that they also won't let you take you to the fucking supermarket either. And, obviously we know the root cause of that has nothing to do with saving plastic or the environment. It's that this kind of innate religious fear that our lives in the West have become too easy. So we have to place little obstacles in front of daily tasks in order to pay our penance for the ease of civilization we've created. So that's why you have to bring your own bag to And people, oh, it's only bring a bag. It's not just bring a bag. It's a pain in the hole. And I don't need to be doing it. And we realised we didn't need to do that decades ago. And then we still have to do it.
You think it's a kind of awkwardness penance? That's interesting, yeah, because a lot of people say the climate madness is a religious cult. The other thing is that it's actually a sort of front for basically communism. You know, there's this meme I talked about on a Weekly Skeptic this week. This guy goes, just a cartoon, but this guy goes, climate change will kill us all. Let's dismantle our socio-economic system to prevent it. The other guy goes, how about nuclear power? Then the first guy goes, I don't want nuclear power. I want to dismantle our socio-economic system. So not really looking for a solution, just trying to work in communism by the back door. But then the other argument is your argument. It's the religious cult. Our lives got too easy. The kind of Dostoevskian thing that he raises in Notes from Underground talks about a crystal palace. Even if man could have this perfect kind of utopian world, he would deliberately sabotage it. That's sometimes what I think we're doing with wokeness. Do you think we're doing that with climate then?
Yeah. I think that's definitely part of it. I think there's an inherent dishonesty in the climate debate because nobody is willing to say, I think humans take precedent over nature, right? But
right, except from Christians.
Implicitly believes. Well, no, I don't even think that.
Dominion over the beasts and all that.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. But no, but very few people actually say that, and but everybody implicitly believes it because most people want what's best for their kids, and most people will kind of do anything to save a human life. I mean, I suppose the only problem with environmentalism is that it's putting kind of barriers between us seeing the consequences of the environmental policy. And there's a huge irony in all of it, which is that if you look at the graphs of how deaths from natural disasters have just totally plummeted over the last century, like they're just fraction, like a less than 1% of what they were. Not even accounting for the giant rise in population, and yet people seem to think that more people are dying from natural disasters than a few decades ago. It's just the opposite of the truth. And the very thing that protects us from natural disaster is economic growth and cheap and abundant energy, which are the very things that the Gretas and the environmentalists want to stop. So I think it's unbelievably poisonous cult. I think it's completely evil. I think that Extinction Rebellion, Just Support are terrorists, occult members. They're a cross between ISIS and the Jim Jones or whatever, what have you. They're drinking their Kool-Aid. They're fantasists. There's no thought, but.
And if you listen to the founder of them, he sort of talks about suffering like we need to suffer. He sort of talks in very quasi-religious terms.
They do, yeah. And if you look at Roger Hallam, the stuff that he comes out with is totally insane. And I don't think it's libelous, but he has a kind of charisma to him that attracts young people. Like a lot of similar cult leaders do. And
we're not saying he's like Charles Manson. We don't know what the legality of that would be.
We're definitely not saying that.
We're just asking, how do you get out of lie? We just ask it as a question. It's satirical content anyway. Yeah. Some people may say, it could be some people's satirical opinion.
Yeah. You say allegedly, and you say, I'm definitely not saying it, but you can say, I believe that he has the appearance of a cult leader. I believe what he says is incredibly violent. I believe he uses incredibly violent imagery. I believe he has a lot of charisma, and I believe a lot of young people are attracted to him. And I believe that he uses that charisma to attract people to him, to his cause. And it's... I don't even remember how we got onto this whole section.
Well... I've got loads of threads open to return to. Don't worry, I've got so many things to ask you. But carry on.
Yeah, but yeah, I think it's just this whole idea of design or not. So my problem with the lack of design issue is that I feel like you haven't actually people who say. Sorry, my problem with the it was all designed problem is I feel like you haven't talked to the people who believe this stuff. Actually go to a standard corporate PR agency. Go to the office of Joe and just listen to them. Of course they believe this stuff. There's no compulsion about it. Everyone thinks it, and so why is it big? Why did the BBC we're talking about at the moment? Why does James Clayton believe that how people got sacked from Twitter is more important than the Twitter files or Elon Musk's ideas about AI? Because he's just a blinkered idiot, and that's what he thinks.
Yes.
That's why.
So this is the interview that just landed. Elon Musk turned the tables on James Clayton, put it on a Twitter space, and James Clayton said things like, well, there's a lot of sexism and racism on my For You timeline on Twitter. And Musk goes, okay, give me one example. And he just fell apart and crumbled and couldn't. It was just an empty talking point.
Yeah, and like you said, it was a bit of a rhetorical trick from Musk, because I probably could have come up on top of my head some pretty out there accounts that have popped back up in recent months. But I think even so, you could make a very spirited defense that these accounts should be out there and they should be heard, or not they should be heard, but they should have the ability to say what they want, because there's a free marketplace of ideas, and these things are important. I mean, what I think is the most interesting about it, I genuinely think Musk bought Twitter to stop the end of the world, if I'm being honest.
Makes sense. Yeah. He certainly wants to troll the legacy media and displace them and make Twitter the source of news. And certainly legacy media is probably one of the most dangerous things in our society. I often say it's the greatest threat to our society, actually, because it's perverse incentives to scare us, to lie.
Yeah. And Musk is very concerned about Ukraine spinning out to nuclear war. He's seen through the COVID bullshit very early on, and he's seen how so much of these things which are potentially civilizational ending have been driven through Twitter, and it's very important to understand that your massive voters aren't on Twitter, and that's why I kind of think that this idea that it is the mainstream media isn't exactly true, because talk to people, talk to your friends. Like, I was a weekend lads holiday. There's 5 of us. None of them knew what the fuck Substack was. None of them knew what was going down on Twitter. I mean, that's one of the shames. That's how the BBC besmirches itself, because they won't report on the Twitter files. But the converse of that is that people barely know what ChatGPT is outside of Twitter. That's where the real discussion of it is going on. The SVB bank collapse and the Sam Bankman-Fried collapse were so much better covered on Twitter by some amateurs with spare accounts and which they do on their spare time, and maybe a few Substacks, than entire newsrooms full of financial journalists, and that's kind of amazing. But at the same time, very, very few voters, as I would term it, are on there. The voters are on Facebook, right? Because Facebook is now just boomers arguing about politics. And then, other segments of the population on the various different ones, like, TikTok, Instagram, whatever you call it. One of the really interesting things is how legacy media like the BBC and sort of charities try to make podcasts for sort of young people, when podcasting is such a kind of millennial and older medium. It's really 30-somethings that were listening to Serial, which was bollocks, by the way. But they just don't quite understand what they have. And one of the very interesting things about the algorithms which control these media is that they really want you to stay on their platform. So Twitter doesn't like it when you link into YouTube. And if you think about it, when you're on Twitter and you see a link to YouTube, you don't really go on to YouTube. You might see, you might try and log it in your head and then scroll a bit more and forget about it. Whereas if you're on YouTube, you're kind of on YouTube and you find other videos on YouTube through YouTube. And people don't quite get how all that works. No, so I digressed. So within those populations, what Musk grasped was that what we in Britain call SW1, but you could call globally the kind of policy making and media elite, they're all on Twitter and they're all totally addicted to it, right? Matt Goodwin's just come out of a book called The New Elite. It might as well just be called, Boomers on Gen Xers on Twitter. Rather not Boomers. Yeah, Twitter's such a millennial Gen X platform. I'm trying to work out what this type of man is at the moment. I'm calling it the inverse gammon. Kind of James O'Brien, David Aronovich.
Oh yeah.
Angry.
There's a Matthew Sweet maybe in there.
Matthew
Otto English,
big one. Otto English, the inverse gammon, who just
James O'Brien's their leader.
Yeah.
And there's loads of lower versions. Yeah, they're very led by donkeys is another one.
Led by people who listen to the Rest is Politics podcast.
Yes, and they drink craft ale. And they drink ale, and they have very. To be honest, a lot of them are in my football team. I mean, this is what I was thinking when you were talking about it. Like when you said before that, like policy advisors are often just sort of graduates and things. I was thinking, I know a guy in my football team who's in a think tank, and it's a famous think tank, but he doesn't really seem to have that many thoughts. I mean, he seems smart, but he's like, he's smart, but he just sort of talked about wokeness in general. It sort of came up, and his basic take was, I sort of feel we've just got to let the young people get on with that. Like, in his company and all that. Like, I don't really understand that. That's for the youngsters. It's like that's a woefully inadequate view of wokeness and identity politics and all the surrounding things for someone in a think tank. That's disastrous. Most of them don't know anything. Go on.
I wanted to. So I was interrupted because I took a photograph of this poster on the tube the other day. I don't know if it'll come up.
You're blurred for me at the moment because of the call.
It's called Kite, a new festival ideas of music, right? So the band are on Hot Chip Suede, The Pretenders, Django, Ian Jury's Son. But it's got it's a new festival of ideas and music. So the ideas section is amazing, right? It is the inverse gammon's weekend of delight. So we got Dame Joan Collins and David Baddiel talking, Chris Patton and Rana Mita, Monroe Bergdorf giving lessons of leadership.
So hang on, that's Chris Patton, former chairman of the Tory party. Monroe Bergdorf, who said that even a homeless white person has privilege. This is a sort of mixed race model.
It gets better. Alistair Campbell, fixing politics, is his bit with Marina Hyde.
Fixing dossiers, invading countries.
Rachel Reeves, bombing. Polly Toynbee,
oh my God.
Nell Godrich. I showed this to my mate over the weekend, and his lovely Northern Irish Will. He looked at it again. What's wrong with that bit of the festival?
That's like the festival of hell. Festival of Death. It's like Alistair Campbell sold out 2,500 seats with Rory Stewart. You're going, who are these people?
Why is the world like this? And so I keep sort of going down the thread. I sort of yank it back here. So that sort of person, but the policy and the intellectual media elite, they're all addicted to fucking Twitter, all fucking on it, and they drove us to absolute disaster with lockdowns, and they created just this enormous hysteria over Trump, and then they could still drive us to nuclear war over Ukraine. And again, it's because they're not thinking about terms in any kind of rationality and logic. It's because they think in terms of the platform game, of the competing platforms, right? And I think Musk bought Twitter because he wants to get people into Mars, right? So his first step was he had to get rockets into orbit. And if the world explodes or is not capable of having a space company anymore, then you're not going to get people on the way to Mars. So I think he simply bought it as a civilizational thing. He realized, do you know what, if things carry on as it is, then it might not function anymore. I mean, if Twitter collapsed financially, then it's highly likely that there would have been some kind of buyout from the policy and intellectual elite that consumes it so heavily and is so addicted to it. And they could have made it even worse. You know, it could have been partially state. It could have been. Imagine Twitter being publicly funded. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, I know. When I said that the legacy media or the media, mainstream media, is one of the biggest threats to our civilization, I was thinking about things like COVID, how that basically was a media creation, and so on. But and there's many things we could cite. But yes, Twitter and social media, especially Twitter, is probably. I'm sort of seeing it as part of that because all these people have a presence on Twitter as well. And that is probably the most dangerous. That's probably the reason we have wokeness, the reason it's been able to catch on, almost certainly is just Twitter, pretty much just Twitter. The woke mind virus, as Elon called it, that's why he's taking over Twitter, to stop that. Maybe to also go to Mars, like you're saying. That's why it's so crucial. It's the absolute crucible of where the civilization is going to go, of free speech. And he's getting some wins. He's saying, NPR, you're state-affiliated, okay, you're state-funded, or, you know, government-funded, BBC, you're government funded. They changed it now to publicly funded, but he's having some pops at the mainstream media. But of course, then you've got the EU want to regulate him, so he's not necessarily winning even on Twitter. It's, you know, it's a sort of last ditch, one man could save humanity. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? That's how I see it. It's like he could save humanity.
It's impressive that it got to that point.
Yeah,
isn't it? It's such a Elon Musk sweeping in to buy Twitter. It's the ultimate Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, and then takes us off to Mars.
Yeah, my plan was for a billionaire to buy us and save us, and it worked. So don't knock it.
Sorry to interrupt, but we have a quick word from our sponsor, Harry Willis. Now, Harry is a fitness, transformation and health coach, and he's guaranteeing that if you work with him, you'll lose 5 kilograms in your first 5 weeks, or he'll coach you for free until you do. He'll design a bespoke plan for your workouts and diet and work with you one-on-one the whole way. I've seen the results he gets, and they are very, very impressive. And you can find Harry on Instagram at Harry_Willis or Willis-coaching.com. Just quote the current thing when you make contact, and he'll give you a free 45-minute consultation to go over your goals. And I also hear he's super based, by the way, which is why he's advertising on this show. So at Harry_Willis or Willis-coaching.com. Now back to the show. And when you say inverse gammons, I think it's similar to a term I came up with called new normies in my article, Confessions of a Conservative Rebel. It's on my Substack. And I was trying to puzzle out, why am I, as I said in the article, I'm in North London dealing with all these normies, and I'm the only one that seems to care about our country or saving it or anything. And then I say in the article, why am I having to save English liberalism and the family from English liberals with families? Like, I'm so confused. They're sort of lefty. They're sort of unthinking. They're the kind of person you mentioned. They're the led by donkeys kind of James O'Brien type person. They all think the same in North London. I tell you what happened. I was in the football group, and they all started talking about Gary Lineker, and I was like, I might have to leave the football group. They all had the same take that Gary Lineker's awesome, that BBC scandal. And I wanted to drop my 1,300-word article from the Daily Skeptic. It was the seminal piece on Lineker and why he was an absolute dick. But I just didn't even do it. Which reminds me actually of another question I was going to ask you about. So there's that weird inverse gammon new normie world we're trapped in, and they've all gone sort of far left. They sort of far left talking points, but kind of living like basically just standard sort of capitalistic kind of people. It's a very weird sort of set of beliefs.
Yeah.
The sort of new elite, as Goodwin says, but mixed with giving lip service to Black Lives Matter and Antifa, weirdly. And the other thing I was going to ask you about is, and then we have to survive amongst them, and you sort of are incognito, and I sort of don't post things and don't speak my mind in the normal world. I just had a funny thing today. I was trying to buy some shoes. My shoes are falling apart. And it's obviously hellish buying clothes and shoes. And as a man, it's just a nightmare. But I got to speak to this guy, and he was asking me what I do, and I told him I do TV and podcasts and stuff and all this. And then he sort of he took my details to like send me the information, but then he sort of he asked my name, therefore, and I suddenly realised I left that key part of the story. He was clearly a leftist from the discussion. He just used certain words that were like key lefty buzzwords, and I thought, and we're getting on really well, and we bonded on like some films we've seen and stuff. And I suddenly thought, like, he's gonna. He hasn't messaged me the details, and I suddenly thought it's because he's checked out who I am, and now he hates me. So, have you had a problem just sort of living in the normal world, being like on the normal side of politics? So you can't. I call it the normal side, meaning normal people who can't reveal their politics because we're thought to be evil.
In a way, like, not really. We had somebody from the BBC round the house the other day, and like on a social, not like my wife's.
You don't mean the license fee people came around?
No, a journalist from the BBC for my wife's like a play date where they brought their kid along, and my wife went, "Don't be too right wing, please. Maybe don't say who you work for." And
then the plumber comes round. He'll be a bit more right wing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can be right wing. But I don't. I generally try to like. So I have this. McCarron isn't my real name. So I do have a little degree of separation when I do kind of more normal corporate jobs, and I still do the odd bit of television, although I haven't done any UK TV for a couple, 2-3 years now. But yeah, the company that I did most of my TV work with, they were known as a diverse company. And they were quite open to the fact that like they were saying, look, that there's this big push for it now, and this is something that we have to take advantage of, because it's a very brutal world out there in TV and media. And they used to say, with you, we really are diverse, because we've got the full spread, of everything, of sort of absurd, ludicrous, reactionary white guy. Versus a bunch of people from ethnic minorities with different shades of left-wing opinion, and that was great. And I also feel that generally I did fall out of somebody a little bit, but it was definitely more them than me, and it happened on Facebook over the COVID stuff. And this GP who I didn't had spoken to in years at school, got very annoyed at me. But generally, like in my actual day-to-day life, I'm okay. My friends, who are all kind of normie in their way, most of them anyway, see where I'm coming from and know who I am. So I've not really had any major problems,
Okay.
Apart from I have one friend who's quite into public health, and I haven't spoken to him properly much recently, but I don't think that relationship's irreparable.
Well, I lost one relationship over masks, and I was told I deserved months of suffering for not wearing a mask. And the other weird topic was whether men had higher upper body strength than women on average. Those two topics managed to lose me a friend who I'd known for 10 years ago.
Do people really try and argue that stuff, that men don't have higher upper body strength? It's just...
I was amazed. It was someone who, it's kind of like what we're talking about, it's someone who wasn't really aware of culture war talking points. I suddenly realised wasn't aware of the arguments. They just sort of had accepted it. There was two things. One was masks, which I wasn't wearing, and they were very vehement about, I've been proved right, oh well. The other one was we got into some weird debate, and I said, well, obviously men have higher upper body strength. And he's called me an idiot repeatedly for ages and shouted at me. I'd forgotten to say on average, because I thought that was so obvious. Like, the sky is blue. Sometimes it's pink, you're an idiot. It's like, no, on average it's blue, isn't it? So it's like, it was just so obvious to me. And he just cited like outliers, like women that could beat us up if they were MMA fighters. Like, yeah, that's called an outlier. Like, it was just really, it's like, you've got to be, but if people don't follow the culture war stuff, thare just not aware, are they? So they just, anyway.
But if you're not even arguing that on average, I mean, what are you even arguing there? I don't see what point they're trying to make.
I think he lived with his girlfriend had just got with was quite a big feminist. I think that's what happened. They got to him, and maybe a quick question about one thing I was wondering about, which is what I always ask how we win the culture war, but we've kind of almost touched on that quite a lot with Twitter and so on. Maybe Twitter's the key. So a double question here: how do we win this culture war thing? And follow up question: are aesthetics important? Because our side, you're a filmmaker, and you have quite strong views. If we look at a bit of filmmaking or a bit of graphics or something, you sort of tend to go like, "That's crap, that's good." Are aesthetics important for our side? Are we sort of a low budget, kind of tacky, and then answer either of those questions, and how we win the culture war?
I think aesthetics are really important. I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I, as a filmmaker? But obviously, the stuff I do with Laurence, I'm working in sort of quite a different environment than I would have done in TV. But I do try and make, the Laurence Fox show look good. And, working with the cameras and lights that I can. And, I sort of think that, like, a lot of it is your positioning and stuff like that, to make things look nice. But, like the film I did with like the documentary we made, Groomed, I think that was very well made. I mean, I look back in it, I'm a bit frustrated that we only could do Zoom interviews with people, but then that's kind of what you have to work with, like I wish I had Riverside back then.
We're recording this on Riverside for the listener. It's like a posh Zoom.
Yeah. We use Zencaster, actually. This is such a boring conversation. It's the same thing. But I wish I knew I had it when I made that. And obviously, it's great to go out and properly film stuff. Like, I'm very early on in the lockdown. In 2020, I made this film with Mike Eden. And I'm still very happy with the way that I shot that. And I made a similar one with John Lee. And so if you take sort of the one where that guy got arrested with Harry and Laurence, I was in my element doing that because it was so much of what I had done before, like, camera on the shoulder, filming it properly, and I hammered through the edit on that. And when I came out, I was very happy with the work. And I feel quite strongly, actually, that our side does lack a little bit of that aesthetic quality. And I think that's very, very important because there's a lot of stories around today that perhaps someone at Dispatches would have been covering 20 years ago, which they just won't touch now. So, GB News did the Groomed thing, and I'd have loved to have done that. Nobody's going to do a kind of proper takedown of low traffic neighborhoods, ULEZ and stuff like that, unless one of us does it, right? And even when a lot of people do it, it's like some guy with their phone in their car. I mean, together, the people they're working with, like the Save Our Streets Bath people have made quite a nice one, which I was just looking at today, actually. And what's interesting is how the tech has kind of come about so that you can actually make stuff look quite good on a budget, on a fraction of the cost, right? So when I was making TV, I went off I was doing a job in the Philippines. It was like a sweet gig, off to the Philippines by myself. And I went in on a tourist visa and just bought a camera, my radio mics, a gimbal, which is like a stabilizer for like smooth shots. I had the shoulder rig thing. I think I was using a tripod, which I was like jimmying into a shoulder rig so I can move it around like that. And I had the drone also in there. And I was thinking, God, 15 years ago, to get the same roster of shots, it was only like a 5-minute thing I was doing. You'd have needed director, cameraman, a massive camera, a sound man with a thing and the boom, um, and probably like an extra assistant producer or something, and a fucking helicopter at the end of it. And I had all of that in my suitcase. It's amazing. And so and a lot more people are starting to realize like that you can actually do that. So one thing we're quite, even with we did a film recently called Drag Wars, where Laurence phoned me up and was like, right, there's this drag queen story hour protest, we're going there, get your stuff. So I was like, okay, great. So like boom boom boom, jimmied up the thing and filmed it and produced what I thought was quite, I mean, I don't normally like filming protests because I think it's quite difficult to get interesting shots of crowds. This is just a kind of aesthetic thing, and sometimes it can be difficult to get. If most protests don't have a counter protest, so it's difficult to get a sense of what they're sort of protesting against. Whereas this one did massively, and so I was able to sort of juxtapose them a little bit in the visuals, and Laurence was able to talk to one of the people on the other side, which is brilliant, because I don't think the film would have quite worked if it didn't have that. And that's something that's, I think, is quite important with a lot of filmmaking, is you need a kind of level of, I think maybe not even filmmaking but storytelling, you need a level of conflict, right, to make the story interesting. And so, but I'm really happy with that bit of work, because even though we just sort of filmed it in a day, hammered it out, like, it looks nice, and I'm happy that and I can look at it as something I've done post TV and think, yeah, I'm really glad, really happy with the way that looks. I'm not. I've certainly no shame with the politics of it. I'd only be ashamed of something if it didn't look good, and that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think Daily Wire are trying to do it. They're trying to do normal films that maybe have a conservative underlying theme, but
well, actually, just to jump in there as well,
yeah.
How to Win the Woke. How this is also factor into How to Win the Woke War. I think you can't look. One of the best things that what wins is the documentary they made, What Is a Woman? Now, What Is a Woman is completely brilliant, and not just from a kind of the sort of message that Matt Walsh is trying to push in that film, but simply from a filmmaking perspective, it's brilliantly done. One of the problems when you have filmmaking, political filmmaking, and a lot of people who just start filmmaking often do this, is your film ends up being a series of interviews. Now, I really don't like that. Now, obviously, it's important to have interviews within your film, especially if you're doing, or I mean, another way I like to do it is base your whole film around one interview. That can be quite interesting. But when you just got a series of talking heads, it really does turn me off, and I think it turns the audience off. Matt's film had a lot of that in it, but they were very thoughtful about how they filmed some of those interviews, and they filmed them quite interestingly. But B, they integrated into it some interesting bits of actuality, of like sending Matt into a protest, and again, it sort of worked because he was the conflict. They were angry at him. He was the counter protest in a way. Had some very nice street scenes, and had these wonderful bits where Matt goes and speaks to a school board, which he did do in real life, and just sort of eviscerates them in the 60 seconds that he's got. Saying, you have this violent, insane ideology that you're pushing on children. But it was also able to illustrate some quite abstract concepts in clever ways, I thought. Like there's these wonderful sort of sequences where Matt is just wandering around the kind of room full of just bald-headed mannequin dolls. And I thought it was brilliantly done and wonderfully shot. So I think there is... And when that came out, was 6 months ago, everybody was talking about it. And the only reason people haven't seen it more is because it's behind the paywall for the Daily Wire. And guys, if any of you are listening from the Daily Wire, if you make it easier for us to do it, to sign on to your thing over here, then we would. But you don't.
I signed up to it. I thought I should support them.
Oh, okay. Because I tried to get I tried for Reclaim to get one to get a sign up, but it just didn't. The website just didn't seem to work.
That sounds like your boomer tech issues, Alex. When they got Jordan Peterson on board, I thought they did a discount. I was like, yeah, go on, I love a discount. I'll get on board. And there is some good stuff on there. You know, it's always, is there enough content? And I've watched some of the films. Yeah, What is a Woman? Obviously, the flagship piece, absolutely brilliant. And the only part I actually thought was a little bit cringe, though, is some of the parts you mentioned. They may have been done well visually, but just watching Matt Walsh have to do act outs, like when he's got the sort of cork board or whatever he's got. I just thought, I bet it's so awkward for Matt just having to go, what do I do now? I have to go and look like I'm looking at this. And I just thought, I just feel his pain a little bit. That's only bit it slightly broke the fourth wall for me. But, you know, it was very well done and very effective. Perhaps been a big part of ending some of this trans madness. Walsh has done some impressive work there. Do you know what?
He's definitely shifted the Overton window on it.
He has, yeah. And I almost wanted to bring the whole podcast together. And when you talked about, and just end it, maybe you talked about the thing with Harry, and you did that filming, and they all said that you were an Laurence Fox was an actor, and it was all fake. It reminded me of Bill Hicks when he said the thing that, not Bill Hicks, Alex Jones, when he said the thing that tipped him off was that he wasn't Bill Hicks, and the internet started saying he was Bill Hicks, and he goes, well, I'm not Bill Hicks. So he realized he's not Bill Hicks. So not all conspiracy theories are true, because I'm definitely not Bill Hicks. And so it comes back to this thing, Team Joby, which is a mixture between Toby Young and James Davenport, which is in between conspiracy moderate. And it reminded me of, and you mentioned Alex Jones, and you mentioned John Ronson. And I don't know if you'll remember this, but they did that thing going into Bohemian Grove, and John Ronson wrote about it in his book, Them. And it's just so great, because they go into, and John Ronson's like, I went with Alex to go to Bohemian Grove. And to find out what's going on. And then Alex Jones, it's the elites, and they get into Bohemian Grove, and it's the elites worshipping an owl god. And it's all, you know, presidents and those type of people have been there for years, and high up corporate people or whatever. And the difference between Alex Jones and John Ronson was that Alex Jones was like, they're sacrificing children to an owl god. And John's like, I don't think that's quite right. Like, but my take, the take of the conspiracy moderate is, and I've said this to you before, they're not sacrificing children, but it's still a bit weird. Like, why are they in the woods in a pantomime way, worshipping a pantomime owl god? The elite, that's weird enough for me. Like, lads, what are you we're not doing that. That's a bit weird. Anyway, what do you think about that? That's my conspiracy moderate wrap-up.
I've heard you say it before, and I think it's such a true thing. Yeah, it's fucking weird, you know, to go. John spoke about that afterwards, and he said how he spoke to Alex and said, look, you know, you and I were both there. They weren't sacrificing children. And he said that Alex gave him the kind of slightest sort of hint of recognition that his audience, he knows what his audience wants, you know. And they called it, I think the technical term is audience capture. I mean, so like on my Twitter account, I mean, I don't have a huge amount of followers, but I noticed during the lockdown times, all my sort of carefully, cunningly thought out critiques of economic policy would just get zero engagement. But if I would say something about the safe and effective treatment, probably joking about how safe and effective it was, it would go, you know, blockbusters. So I think that's partly where a lot of these things come from. You know, it's in some ways you're just kind of giving the people what they want, and I suppose that could be spun into an argument by the kind of normie censorship industrial censorship industrial complex of that. That's why we have to step in as publicly funded broadcasters to move people in the right direction. But I would say that's also a complete lie, because the damage that the Remain establishment did in the Brexit wars of trying to undermine the democratic process, the fact that 3 years were spent just doing nothing legislatively, you know, and Dominic Cummings spoke about this in a podcast. You know, he'd come into Parliament in 2019 and just see sort of MPs and Lords almost in tears in corners, just unable to handle what's happening. And I remember it being so totally crushed once I was in this Leavers pub gathering, and they set up the TV with BBC News, Parliament, or Sky News or something, and a series of votes were coming in on various kind of Brexit bills, all in one night, and it was just bang, 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 like leaving the customs union, bang, no, leaving, bang, bang, one after another. And I just thought, you know, that the faith that they'd totally destroyed in people's grasp of politics is going to take a long time for that to recover. So and Carol Cadwallader won an Orwell Prize, you know, and she's recognised for what she what she said to move over to the across the Atlantic. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is still saying in Congress that the Hunter Biden story was Russian disinformation. Still, like the truth has no bearing on what she's saying, and I suppose that's my biggest problem with a lot of the media. It's like they're so removed from the truth. It's like Liz Truss was defenestrated from being the Prime Minister for several reasons, you know, largely because the markets were completely spooked by over-leveraged pension funds that the Bank of England had to jump in for, and this massive, enormous, historically unprecedented, uncapped energy bonus. The public, right, have been fed by the BBC that it was because of a corporation tax cut. It beggars belief. The mental gymnastics you have to think for that to be true, that a bunch of city boys got together and crashed the economy because they thought that corporation tax was too low. How is that? And go talk to your normie friends go ask them in your football club, everyone at home, everyone's got normie friends. You say, why did Liz Truss have to stop being Prime Minister? They'll tell you, it's because she put tax too low. And so the city boys tanked the economy because they thought tax would be too low. It beggars, but I feel so often that like there's just lie after lie after lie. So in a way, I'm never going to begrudge, you know, the kind of conspiracy theorists, all the Team Jameses, because, you know, we live in a world of just sort of perpetual dishonesty, it seems to me. And, you know, I have my views that these problems are self-organizing, but they're still there. You know, I don't think there's an intelligent mind behind it. I think the mind, the cabal, if anything, is almost like the group intelligence of a termite mound or an ant colony. You know, people often think of ant colonies that the ant queen is telling all the ants where to go. You know, you guys do the eggs, you guys defend. That's not what happens at all. The queen just fucking sits there and makes eggs, and all the ants just do their other stuff, and all they're doing is following the most basic genetic instructions of like, follow that ant, stop, intruder, you know, eat. That's all. That's all, and they create these most incredible intricate structures, and that's literally what I think is happening amongst us now. And you know, I think people at the BBC should hang their heads in shame for what they're doing to the country, to just completely besmirching everything that was built on just this constant tissue. And it's almost like there's also lies by omission, you know, as well. And so even I made this point today on Twitter. Not a lot of people have made it yet, but James Clayton interviewed Elon Musk, and he spent the majority of it saying, don't you feel bad about the people you let go? How much money have you got? Do you sleep in the office? Rather than saying, the Twitter files, let's learn about that. The biggest abuse of the First Amendment ever, one of the most biggest corporate political scandals in a generation. Tell us about that. Or how about Elon? You said you want to pause investment in AI. How do you square that with being pause in order to investigate the dangers? How do you square that with being an early investor in AI? And is that even possible? And what are those dangers? Did you not foresee them when you were opening up? Elon, like I heard, you think we could live in a simulation. Let's talk about that. And this guy was given an hour with Musk, and he just didn't think any of that was worth mentioning. And it's the same thing if they, it's like this podcast. One of the other big inverse gammon ones, the news agents, where you can listen to John Sopel, Emily Maitlis, and the other guy, Lewis, whatever his name is. I mean, why the fuck would you want to listen to that? But it's like, now we can hear what they really think. But it's the same thing, and it's the same constant crap and bullshit about everything. Just these people just vomiting their opinions back on each other. So yeah, that's how I would end that point. It's just basically why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm working for who I'm working for, is just I'm just so completely disgusted at all the lies and deceit that is just being shoveled at us constantly from day to day. And one of my jobs, I mean, I don't know how much of my output that you watch, but I try very hard to be quite fair and balanced and logical about these things. When I made Groomed, I was quite open about where these ideas came from, and the kind of, and Josh Dawes, one of the guests, was very, very interesting about how a lot of these ideas evolved from the writings of Paulo Freire, who was this Brazilian educator, wrote this book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I'm working on a thing about the history of drag queen story hour at the moment, and I'm really trying to dig into where it's from and trying to be fair, to everyone involved. And I think that's really important, because if you're not, you just leave this huge gap that people just fill up, where they come up with stuff that actually, it turns out that Laurence Fox is part of the controlled opposition because he was an actor, all these absurdities. And I think that's really, really important.
All right, so because we've done well over an hour and half an hour before that fixing the sound, I think maybe we can end, or maybe I should just lastly ask, because this is one more thing I'm curious about. Last question: you're with Reclaim, and we've got all these parties coming up now at Reform UK, and you've talked about Liz Truss and that whole debacle. Are the Tories finished? And is party politics actually going to change now they've finished?
I'll only say one thing on that. I would say that the Conservative Party is the most effective electoral fighting force in the Western world, and has been, and is the oldest, and that has survived the longest. So I think it'd be foolish to write them off.
Yeah, depressingly true. All right, thanks for that, Alex. And you talked about your Twitter a little bit. I believe it's Alex McCarron. Is that right?
Yeah, if you just search Alexander McCarron, it will come up.
That's the easiest way to find it.
I should have had an easier one, because it's not the easiest one to. I mean, I forget myself how to spell it when I type it into the.
Yes, Alexander McCarron. I forget as well, but it is findable. And then you've got your other work with the Reclaim. You do the Reclaim YouTube channel. What's it
Yes, that's called Reclaim the Media. So
Yeah.
that's has various clips, bits and bobs, been documentaries that we do, and host the Laurence Fox show,
Which
which
I
is
was
always
on the other day.
entertaining. Which you were on the other day. One of the best episodes we ever did because it was so interesting. In fact, actually, we clipped one of your bits. And it did quite well.
Oh, good.
The other day, and then I've just started up a Substack called How to Be Sound.
Oh, cool.
And the Escape from Lockdown podcast feed will be reactivating in the next month or two with a
Okay.
slightly new format, a different name.
What's it? Can you tell us what it's going to
won't
be, or is
be-
it top secret?
No. I'll be honest, I mean, actually, I'll force this. I'm stuck on the name, but basically, I want to do it with Ben Pyle, who I've worked with a little bit before, and I really like. And rather than interviewing a new guest every week, because I'm sure you're finding it's actually a pain in the ass to.
Oh yeah, it's a massive pain. They postpone, they cancel, then
Yep.
you can't. All sorts. Yeah, all sorts.
Yeah, it's just a whole stress. So I'm not going to do that. But what I want to do is, and the other thing I don't want to do is have a podcast which like just sort of discusses news every week. So what I want to do is create a podcast where every episode will sort of dissect an issue. And I've been inspired by this podcast called Weird Studies, which this bloke in a pub in Oswald Street turned me on to 18 months ago. There's a really, really interesting podcast about kind of art, philosophy, bit of macabre, and has a really nice format that I like a lot. With sort of starts with a spoken word piece. The two presenters occasionally have a guest, as we will do. But I thought it'd be interesting to take an issue, so like euthanasia or something, or something like that, and really just interrogate it and pull it apart and analyze it from every way.
All right, cool. Yeah, well, your Escape from Lockdown podcast was excellent when it was around, and so I'm sure this new one with Ben will be very interesting. Ben's an interesting guy, very knowledgeable on climate. It's not my top area, but I can confirm he's knowledgeable. And all right, and it's an interesting idea doing one topic. That'll be very. You could run out after about 12 topics, but other than that, it should be very good.
Yeah, but then you run out of guests.
I know, it's tricky. Well, I've also got the Weekly Skeptic where the only guest is Toby, so that's quite easy. Then you have to deal with him every week.
I do like the Weekly Skeptic. I've been really. It's become one of my weeklies.
Oh, thank you very much. 20,000 downloads in a week now, so which on audio, that's top 1% in the country. So we're doing very well.
That's very good. Yeah.
Trying to get this podcast up there. We're starting on similar numbers to where Weekly Skeptic was, so I can get there, I think, with this podcast as well. But I'm doing them both for now. Why not? And thanks so much for coming
on YouTube, it's just one little factoid that I only found out. If your video has 1,000 views on YouTube, you've got more views than 88% of videos uploaded to YouTube.
Wow.
So it's the same thing with everything. Podcasts, Substacks. What you see is the cream of everything that's being produced. So to fight your way to that top bit, as you've done with Weeks Get to get that 1%, is really, really tricky.
I did it in 30 episodes. I mean, that's all I'm saying, guys. Because some people, London, they've got all these London Calling fans, and it took them years to get there. And I said to Toby, what's the one different variable between London Calling and Weekly? It's the kind of thing I say. I meant me. All right, thanks so much, Alex. So go to Reclaim the Media, go to Alexander McCarron on Twitter, and check out his new podcast when it comes out. And thanks so much, mate. Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
All right, that was Alex. Another fun show, I thought. And if you're watching on YouTube, please hit subscribe, hit like, all that kind of thing. I know it's not a perfect background yet, guys. My camera isn't perfect. The lens is rubbish and all that. Alex was giving me some tips on that. So we'll improve all that, but it's baby steps. And if you're listening on the audio, please give it a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you're listening. Write a review, tell a friend, all that good stuff. And we'll see you again next week.